figure that out. Usually just end up over at like 4-day rate or something. Anyone want bourbon? Bourbon? Yeah, bourbon, yeah. Cool. Well, great. So tonight's presentation, let me switch over to that set of slides. If I can find it. Oh, there it is. Yay. Oh, thank you. Let's talk about things. Okay. So tonight's presentation is, let's see if it shows up. There we go. To Xamarin or not to Xamarin, that's the question. So it seems like about half of you are into Xamarin, or already use Xamarin, or have used Xamarin, and half of you, or more than half of you, actually have not. So I want you to know that you can ask questions at any time during this, because you might want more clarification if you're an existing Xamarin developer about what's the state of Xamarin now, and you might want to know, well, how does this fit into other approaches I may want to take as a mobile developer if I'm considering an app. So feel free to raise your hand at any time. It's not a canned presentation where you can't interact with me at all. I'm not a Walt Disney World animatronic thing, so let me know. A little bit about me. I've been doing the Xamarin thing for a long time, but I've also not done Xamarin for a long time. So way back, let's get in the time machine. Let's go back to when mobile development was a thing where it ran on embedded devices. So like Windows CE devices or Wind River systems, etc. I never got into Wind River, where you wrote embedded C, where you wrote C and it ran with a cute little microkernel and everything popped up. Never did that. Gene, you might have, who knows? But back in the day, I did write Windows CE applications. And back then, it was very interesting. Your only choice was to do native. But you also had a ton of limitations. Like you had to have, back in the Windows CE days, you had to have 32 kilobytes of contiguous memory. And if it got any more fragmented than that, the application would crash. And back then, there was no such thing as managed applications. So things would just crash. Things would leak all over the place. Embedded operating systems were terrible. I mean, this is all back when Windows 98 was still running on some machines. So it's been a long time. It's gotten a lot better, and we're spoiled today. So back then, your only option really was native. That's back in the 90s, early 2000s. It was hell. Palm was a thing. Anyone here heard of Palm or used a Palm or owned a Palm? You had to create the entire user interface in code using C. It was terrifying. That's why I never got into it. Actually, the Newton operating system, their applications rarely crashed, which I found interesting. And the Newton OS was very cool, but it died. So if you ever want to learn about Soup, which is what Newton called its storage system, let me know, because I am actually a tried and true Newton developer. Lots of stories about that. So fast forward though to the iPhone days and Windows. Really, we're not going to go and concentrate really much at all about Windows Mobile, because that was good for like 3 years. It was like acceptable for 3 years, but it wasn't really good. The thing that really kicked off this mobile application, or the mobile app ecosystem and everything, was the iPhone. We all remember the iPhone, right? What was that, 2006? I think it was 2006. So the iPhone came out, you couldn't build your own applications. So what did you do? If you wanted to get some sort of solution on the iPhone, you built a web app. And back then, this is before we really had Bootstrap, but we just had a whole bunch of websites and we had no apps. So what people would do is they would just say, oh yeah, just go bookmark the website and show it up on your phone, and it would look terrible, it wouldn't scale right, the mobile browsing experience was terrible, and it was a terrible user experience. People just continued to use their desktop. But then Apple and Jobs said, hey, you know what? Sure, yeah, we'll open up iOS to development. And around the same time, Android opened up. So iOS comes out with Android, or with iOS development, and we had to write everything in Objective-C and Xcode. And if you used Xcode way back in the day, it was horrible. You probably remember that, Cameron. This is before Swift, though, like way back when, like way before 1150. And oh my gosh, it was terrible. And Objective-C was terrible. It was Smalltalk and C mixed together. It was gross, if you can tell that I have a little bit of bias against it. But if you wanted to be on Apple's ecosystem, you had to build your mobile app that way. Then, of course, if you wanted to write it for Android, you had to build it in what? Java. You had to build it in Java. There was an NDK, but people wrote their stuff in Java. Well, that was all great. While people learned Objective-C to start building their applications, while people learned Java in order to get their applications onto Android. What did you do in the meantime? Because there was such a high demand for these application developers, they were commanding $200+ an hour. So what did you do when you wanted to build your app? You create an app that just had a web view in it, and you stuck your website into it. Anybody remember PhoneGap? Anybody remember jQuery Mobile? Okay, so prior to PhoneGap, we had jQuery Mobile. And so the way you can style your application to use, to look kind of like an app is use jQuery Mobile, which had all the styles and everything inside of it. And you stuck that into a web view, and it ran super slow. It was terrible, but at least you had an app. And that worked on iOS and Android. It wouldn't look like an iOS app, it wouldn't look like an Android app, but it ran and you were able to get something to market. If you wanted to do something native and fast and a quick user experience, quick for the time, you had to write your Objective-C app, your iOS app in Objective-C, and you had to write your Android app in Java. And that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. And your back-end systems probably were not written in Objective-C. They might have been written in Java. So if they were written in Java, you were in good shape. But there was a lot of PHP back then. There was also a lot of .NET. So you may have your API in one language, your iOS app in Objective-C, and then your Android app in Java. Now you're maintaining 3 code bases. Anyone know what that instantly translates to? Other than cost? Technical debt. Technical debt all over the place because it's a different implementation of everything. So, solutions came out to address this. It wasn't just Xamarin. So, way back in the day, we had the Mono framework, building an open source .NET solution. I'm trying to remember what the original name of Xamarin was. It was Mono something. I don't remember. But eventually it became Xamarin, turned into a company. You know who originally owned the Mono framework? Anyone? Novell. Just to go as far back as we can. I don't know if some of you are too old or too young to actually remember Novell. But yeah, they were a thing back then. I'm actually a certified Novell administrator. I am a CNA. Novell 4 and 4.1 and above. Anyway, some people laugh. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, how do we solve this problem of building an app without writing it 3 times? Because A, it's not cost effective. B, it's almost impossible to maintain. And C, our system, we don't know how to support it once it's built. Like we know our back end, but we don't know any of this front end stuff or any of this middleware that's being built to build an application. So solutions came forward like Xamarin, and another one called Titanium. Anyone hear of Titanium? So what Xamarin did, and we'll get into what Xamarin is they said, okay, well, if you have C#, if you're using .NET and you have C#, you can just write everything in C#. And you'll get a native app out of it. You still have to build an iOS app, it was just written in C# instead of Objective-C. But that by itself is worthwhile. because now you can take all of those, like your API libraries, you can take all of your all your developer know-how, all that back-end stuff, and the only thing you had to worry about really was finding someone that understood how to build the UI and who kind of understood how iOS worked, but at least you could write it all in C#. And the same thing for Android, you could write it all in C#. It would still be an Android app, it would have a main activity, just like iOS would have an on-finish launching, with its app delegate, but it was all written in C#. So at least it's easy to understand from that side. And you can use all your libraries that you're used to. Then there's Titanium. And Titanium, I'm trying to remember the details of that. It was HTML, and I think it was some hybrid of JavaScript. And then all the UI was built using JSS, which is Java Style Sheets. I didn't even know they existed, but look it up. Look up how you had to build a Xamarin or a Titanium app. And when you wanted to distribute the app, you had to pay, I recall, a licensing fee to the Titanium team to actually compile and distribute your app and put it on the app stores. And it was expensive, like it was prohibitively expensive. Now at the time, Xamarin wasn't free either. It was a couple $1,000s. Because I remember I had to pay for it once. So, back in the day, there were people trying to solve this. But Xamarin over time, Titanium I think is gone. I haven't heard Titanium in years. There were a couple other ones around there, but they didn't really go anywhere. Xamarin's really the only one that really stuck around. And it's really changed, because now it's free. Now it's owned by Microsoft. Now it's, you get it with Visual Studio, and you don't pay a dime to put an app out. But this whole time that everything's kind of building up, what was everyone using starting in like the late 90s and then up to today? It's like it's probably the most popular language on earth right now. It's JavaScript. And everything started getting better. Everyone knew JavaScript, and then people kept on trying to make this one, the little language that was never meant to become this, do more than it shouldn't do. And then here we are, we've got like the React and its framework, we've got NativeScript, we've got Angular, and all these different great things. How can we translate all of that mobile development or that web application know-how into mobile development know-how? And that's where things like React Native have come in, and NativeScript, which NativeScript's very good if you're an Angular developer. So if you're looking for the equivalent of React Native, go look at NativeScript. And then there's a few others out there, like Flutter, and then other cool things, like there's a CSHTML5, anyone heard of that? You can actually convert HTML to Xamarin Forms pages just on the fly, and they run native. And then we've got WebAssembly and everything coming out. So the waters will probably get muddied again. Tech, it looks like that. And then today, you have all of these solutions, right? We've got iOS with Swift, we've got Java Android with Java and Kotlin and OpenJDK. We've got JavaScript powering React Native and NativeScript and whatever else is out there that uses JavaScript, yet another JavaScript framework, right? YAJF. You've got Xamarin, which has gone crazy over the last few years. It's amazing how it's changed, especially if you start in the beginning. To now, SPAs, single page applications and progressive web apps that tie into that, where you download the application on your phone as, well, it's JavaScript, but then, look at all the acceleration around JavaScript these days. Who would know? Anyone here heard the app Untapped? Really? Beer? Yay. Untapped, originally written in PhoneGap. And people used the PhoneGap version of that for years. It might still be PhoneGap for all I know. I don't know if it is, but it's crazy. That was all PhoneGap.
I haven't been keeping up too much, but whatever happened to Visual Basic, and does Xamarin support Visual Basic?
I have not written a Xamarin app with Visual Basic, but considering, now, I don't know that it definitely doesn't support it. I haven't tried, you might be able to. I could check and see, because I haven't tried building a Visual Basic app in a long time. I've accidentally selected Visual Basic in the past year, and then been angry because I had to delete all the stupid files and everything. But because it's .NET, and I'll just compile it down to MSIL anyway, which is then what Xamarin ends up, feeding into the Mono framework and then building your app. I don't see why it wouldn't work. Now you could probably build something with lol code if you wanted to, but if anyone knows what lol code is, look it up sometime. LOLCODE. I can't have Xamarin app. Very cool, but because it's .NET, I don't think the language actually matters. But generally, people write in C#. And I know that you can also do it in F#. That's an option right out of the box. I'll actually answer your question real quick, because now I want to know. I just launched Visual Studio in C, right? Because it's included. Let me know if you can see the yay.
Is Microsoft phasing out Visual Basic or since?
No.
Oh.
I mean, heck, I think you can even build a .NET Core app with Visual Basic. I mean, it's a .NET language. There's nothing non.NET about VB. I mean, if that's what you like,
Yeah.
I don't know that they stop you. Let me see though. Let's look up a Xamarin app. Yeah. Oh, no. Go back. Mobile app. Let's see. Visual Basic.
Visual Basic new.
Can I? No. It's showing me the template. I'm trying to see if there's a Visual Basic template. Do you see the F#? Can you see that at all? Yeah. If you look on the side monitor, it might be better. I don't see a template that includes Visual Basic. So, out of the box, the template, you're probably gonna want to go the C# route, or F#. If Dave Fancher was here, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, F#." But I don't know. That's a good question. I'd like to see, like, what would the Visual Basic approach be? So that's the history of mobile development. It's really changed in just the past 20 years, even the last 10 years. The landscape is so different into how to build an app. It used to only be native, but these days, that's really not the case. These days, a lot of applications aren't written natively at all. They're not iOS specific. They're not written in Swift. They're not Java. They're something else.
So how do you deploy your app to the iPhone store? You still have to have an Apple developer license and all that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to build an IPA, you need Xcode, because it has to be built on a Mac, right? So Xamarin will build the IPA, but then you need to use Xcode and a Mac to sign it.
Okay.
But you get an IPA out of it. It's not like you're getting something that's an IPA plus something else. It's a native app. Same thing with Android, you're getting an APK out of it. I mean, there's technical details around it all, right?
Right.
But if you want to distribute your Android app, you get a signed APK, and you can distribute it through Google Play, or you can just, of course, hand out the APK, just like any other Android app.
Right.
And then the iPhone app is just an IPA, and then beer again, right? But it's an IPA, and then you could either distribute it through the App Store. You could, deploy it right onto your iPhone, just as if you're running Xcode. And then, of course, enterprise application. You go through the same process of uploading your app. So you publish your app. These days, you got that new wizard in Xcode, that takes care of it all. Same things used with Xamarin. Yeah.
So did you say you had to have a Mac to publish?
Yes. Now, let's say you don't want to buy a Mac. Not even the Mac Mini. All you want to do is test it on an iPhone. You don't want to own a Mac. You still need to deploy. You can use a third-party service like Mac in Cloud, So I don't know if you've heard of that, but just look up Mac in Cloud, and there's probably other services out there.
There's a bunch.
Yeah.
So is the process, I asked this question moons ago, and I think you said that it's not a drop and go. There was some cleanup or some lifting that still had to be applied in order to publish an iOS from Xamarin.
I don't think so. With any iOS app, right? So here's the thing. When you build an app, and I'll get into more of this, but just to answer your question, when you build an application using the Xamarin framework to build an iOS app and or an Android app, you're building an iOS app and an Android app. So whatever rules are around that application, you have to follow them. Xamarin doesn't get around it. The only thing it does is say, okay, everything you're building will be written in C# and you get all the benefits of using Visual Studio or VS Mac. But if you have an iOS app and it has, let's say, location usage, it uses location on the device. It doesn't matter if Xamarin's from Microsoft. You're building an iOS app. So you need to understand how iOS and its ecosystem and permissions and operating system works.
Is Xamarin going to tell me that?
Not always.
That's where we left off.
So, and that's something that I get into. So this stuff right here, I mean, I can tell you now, and I can always just skip over it in the next, I'm not a slide-driven guy. When you build using any of these cross-platform hybrid solutions, or you build even just an Android app or an iOS app, you need to understand the platform to which you're deploying. So if you're building an Android app, you need to understand the rules of building an Android app, how activities work, how intents work, etc. A lot of that in the frameworks, these cool frameworks that are out there like Xamarin or React Native or NativeScript or Titanium or what have you, the ones that spit out an IPA, or probably in this case an APK, an Android app, you need to understand how all that other stuff behind the scenes works, because when something goes wrong, you can't go, well, I don't understand any of that. I'm just a JavaScript developer. I know React. I don't understand Android. Well, you should understand Android because you're building an Android app. Same thing with iOS. You need to understand that you have 17 seconds from the time the application launches to your application being available. If you're doing something on the main thread and it's not responding, it'll kill you. It'll just kill your process. It doesn't care.
So is the application lifecycle considerations still have to be taken into account?
Yeah, when you're building an Android app, you're building an Android app. It doesn't matter whether you used Xamarin or not. If you're building an iOS app, you're building an iOS app.
But you use a term called tech debt. It
Right.
seems like there's a little bit here.
Well, no, this is like you're still compiling. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Like you're compiling to the native code that device runs, right? So the operating system, it's the native operating system interacting with native code. So you have to understand how that piece works.
Yeah.
There isn't the technical debt here is that like you're expected to understand that you can't just do everything willy-nilly in the iPhone world, for instance. You have to, or in Android both, you have to understand permissions, you have to understand how things work, just like you would any other system.
Yeah.
This is just slightly more strict.
Yeah, and to be fair, technical debt really isn't the right term.
Yeah.
So here's the key. When you go and you're building an Android app, understand how Android works. If you're going to build iOS, understand how iOS works. However you write that application, you need to understand that. Because that will affect what devices you can target. It'll affect compatibility. It'll affect your user experience. Those are all important things, regardless of whether you use Xamarin or not.
So
Now, the point of when I said technical debt, and let me move to the next slide and explain some of that, because it might answer some more questions for you. Because we go on and on about that one. But here's the key. If you're going to build an iOS app, understand iOS. even if you know a language that's owned by Microsoft or run by Microsoft or maintained by Microsoft. Same thing for Android, same thing for UWP, built a Universal Windows Platform app. Same thing for if you built something for this watch. There are rules and limitations to this, so regardless of how you get to this application, you need to understand the rules around that application, just like if you're building a Windows app or you're building a web application. There's certain things you do and don't do in that framework. This is just another one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Fell asleep and then wanted to see if I can get out of that back in the presentation mode. Good battery life. I just never told it, oh yeah, I'm going to talk for 15 minutes. So what is Xamarin? Oh boy, I chose a great color scheme. I like the cool feature of like building the slide automatically, like the designs, and then I didn't realize how terrible that would look. So I apologize, but I'll read it even though I'm not a fan of reading slides. So the simple answer is you're building a native mobile app with .NET. That's what Xamarin is. You're building a native mobile application with .NET. The official one from Microsoft is Xamarin extends the .NET developer platform with tools and libraries specifically for building apps for Android, iOS, tvOS, watchOS, macOS, and Windows. Basically, use all the tools and code that you already know, probably already have, and also spit out an iOS app, or an Android app, or a tvOS app, etc.
So in summary, really, I'm not learning Xcode, that's a relief.
Right.
But I still have to learn the device.
Learn the what?
The device that I'm targeting.
You need to learn the operating system, or you need to learn the platform. So, a lot of this, which I can walk you through this. So, everything new is a lot of information, so take this one step at a time. You're building an Android application. Let's say you want to target Android. There's certain things that you should understand about Android. And like I said before, which I said just a minute ago. Same thing for iOS. There's certain things you should understand about iOS, around permissions, around how what the devices look like, around location services, around using the battery, around performance considerations, a whole bunch of things that you'll learn over time as a mobile developer. If anything, if you're new to mobile development is a different way of looking at development. Because you don't have gobs of PC memory, even though they come with like 4 gigs of RAM. You have a little teeny battery sucking, or a processor that's fast, but only in bursts. It has access to memory, and this device has various form factors, usually running either 4x3, like widescreen, or portrait or landscape. You may or may not have internet connectivity. People may have not paid their cell phone bill. You might not have any storage left because it might have gobs of memory and processing capacity, but no storage space left. And people could turn your app off at any time, or receive a phone call in the middle of it. Whole bunch of things that are different. It has nothing to do with Xamarin. It's just the form factor is something totally new. So if you're used to a web server handling thousands of requests, that's one thing. If you're used to a desktop app where people have like 17 different windows open at the same time, and they can just throw your application into the background, let it do its thing, and then they can come back to it later and it'll be done. That's not how mobile operating systems work. You need to become a mobile developer. So, very important things. The two top operating Android by a wide margin, and iOS. So you need to understand how those two work. Anyone here a Windows developer? Like ever build a WinForms app? Okay. So if I explained that, it wouldn't help much. But if you've ever seen a Windows application turn gray while you're using it, and nothing's responding in it, it just turns gray, just like dims it out. That's because they're doing something on the main UI thread. So they're not doing it in the background, they're doing it on the main UI thread. So nothing responds because it's the UI thread. You do that in iOS or Android, the operating system will kill your process.
Sooner or later, yes.
And Android loves to just randomly do it. iOS, it just fails silently. You know, your application goes zoop into the background, that cute little animation. It's all a lie. The operating system could have killed you. You know, you probably remember when Xcode randomly failed. Like we had, like, you know, what was it? No, like closures would fail. And it was just like, oh, yeah, sorry, that's just a bug in iOS. That's just the way it is. So, I mean, the operating systems have gotten a lot better, but they used to really suck. So, learn to be a mobile developer. Forget about Xamarin being the reason that you need to have issues. It'll take care of a lot of stuff for you, thankfully. But you still need to understand the underlying system, or you'll just run into trouble, and you can't blame Xamarin for it. So, other cool things about Xamarin: it is free, it is cross-platform, and it's open source. So if you want to make Xamarin better, you can contribute. I have happily had my pull request rejected by the Microsoft development team. So, but I've also seen some great pull requests where the community gets involved and says, this would be a cool feature, and they roll it in. They are an awesome team. The guys who run Xamarin at Microsoft are cool guys. And they get it. So they care about a quality product. Interesting, UWP has kind of like disappeared from a lot of the branding. Yeah, oh well. But it's an application platform for building Android and iOS apps with .NET and C#. Yes, generally these days you'll build it with .NET Core. .NET Core is great. I love .NET Core these days. I did not like .NET Core 1.0, but when .NET Core 2.0 and 2.1 came out, I was a fan because it was ready to go. Very cool. Anybody remember PCL? Okay,
Yeah.
you definitely remember PCL because we talked about it ad infinitum. Oh man, PCL sucked.
Yes, it
.NET Core solved all those problems. Yay! Forget that people don't really understand .NET Standard versus .NET Core and what the difference is. I will not get into that tonight, but I can explain it to you.
Well, I can tell you the difference. One can work on Linux and the other can't.
I'm not going to get into it. It is a longer discussion. That is not this talk. But cool things, you get to write everything in C#. Maybe you can use F#. Maybe you can use VB. I don't know. But I'm a C# developer these days. So yay, I write everything in C#. So you get cool things that are hard to do in Java, I think, and Swift, like asynchronous operations on both platforms. You just use async and await. So if you want to pass things back so that the UI thread can do its job, asynchronous development. Which, by the way, if you've done asynchronous development in .NET, it is a breeze. Async and await are phenom. And if you end up using it in a mobile app, you get really used to it because it's so easy to do. I love it. I love async development. I used to hate it. Now that I do it all the time. Won't build an application, it doesn't use it now.
You can do that. You can do that. You can do that in Swift, and you can do that in Java if you want.
Of course you can, if you want. You got to do it two different ways in two different languages. But that's okay. I mean, so here's the cool thing. If you're a .NET shop, and you already have all your business objects written in C#, you already have all your business objects for your Android and your iOS app. So the same ones used by your API are the same that are going to be used in your iOS and your Android app. You want to talk about a lack of technical debt? When you only have to when you only have to write the service tier once that calls the API, that is a lack of technical debt. If you find a bug, how many places do you have to fix it if it's in the REST API implementation? Once. If you need to change the model that's being passed. Where do you change it? It's once in that shared library that you've got. If you're going all native, platform-wise and language-wise, you'd have to write that same business object again. You'd have to fix it in Java. You'd have to fix it in Swift. Maybe you'd also have to fix it in your C# or whatever your application is written in. When you had to modify the call, you'd have to update it in Java. You'd have to update it in Swift. You'd have to make sure that that all works hunky-dory. That's a lot of work. So I hope you have that budget. And if you do, call me. I will help you spend it. Like I said, .NET Core all the way. And everyone here loves NuGet. If you're a .NET developer, you must love NuGet. NuGet, like practically all the packages these days work with .NET Standard, right? They target .NET Standard, 2.x, right? Or 1.x. Oh, look, it works. So Newtonsoft, the JSON library, that's there. Retrofit, it's there. Whole bunch of cool things. Akavatch for all your caching frameworks. Poly, all of them are there. Entity Framework is somewhere. I don't know why you'd have that in your mobile app, but all your SQLite stuff, that's there. And there's a lot of versions of these packages that also properly have implementations specifically for iOS and Android, etc. They have the little tweaks. And it's very cool because all you do is grab the package. So it's just like NPM, right? We have all of our cool node, I don't know all the parlance there, but if you know what package manager is, it's like that for .NET. So very cool. That's what Xamarin does. So if you already have C# applications and you need basically a new presentation tier on top of it, here you go. Reuse most of your code. I think they have, if you go all in, including using Xamarin Forms, which does the UI abstraction, so you're still building an Android and an iOS app. But you can also, instead of using like the AXML files in Android and the storyboards in iOS, you can use Xamarin Forms, which is kind of like what React Native really is, to abstract all the UI stuff, and you build the UI ones as well. And it automatically renders the native controls, just like React Native does. Except, unlike React Native, you can drop right into C# and build something specifically on the iOS side or the Android side, write it all in C#, and it's all part of the application. Whereas in React Native, or NativeScript, etc., if you want to do something to extend it, you got to go write your Java implementation of it, you have to write your iOS implementation of it, because that can't be in JavaScript. Cool thing about Xamarin, it's all of iOS in C#. So like AV-Kit is there, if you need it. Health Kit, Home Kit, all that stuff. Day and date releases with all the iOS stuff. Same thing for all the Android stuff. The day Pi came out. I don't remember, the Android 10, I think is all they call it now. I'll be right with you. Day and date release. So you have access to all the libraries. So if you need to go and do a native implementation of something, it's there. You don't have to wait for the platform to support it. All the libraries are there.
So that includes things like ARKit?
Yep. It's all there. That's the difference with Xamarin and React Native, which I know I was going to get into it, but I'll talk about it anyway. React Native is really a UI thing, the way I see it. Very powerful, lets you do some amazing stuff. I haven't forgotten that you had a question. But you can't go and say, oh, hey, I need to go do this stuff with like ARKit right now, if it doesn't already support it. If you want to go and build an extension to that, you have to go and build the Swift, do whatever. I don't know how to do it, but I know that you have to go build your component and then bring it into your platform. You can't just go do that in JavaScript and just link it. Xamarin, you can do that. So if you have, let's say you've got your AR implementation on Android, which I don't remember what it's called, and then whatever, ARKit on Apple, I can write an interface that does all the things that I want, build an a C# implementation on the Android side. It has all the stuff that uses the Android libraries to do it. And then I can write my iOS implementation of it using all the iOS libraries. And then in my application, just use dependency injection and say, give me my implementation for iOS. Boom, it comes in. That code's all right there. If it crashes, I go straight to the breakpoint where it died because it's an iOS app. So I can debug it and everything natively because I'm not abstracting any of that. The only difference is I'm writing, for the most part, I'm writing an iOS app in C#. I'm writing an Android app in C#. And that's what I'm running, that's what I'm debugging. What was your question?
I have two separate questions.
Sure.
But the first one is, so iOS 37 or whatever comes out and it's got some new features. How long before that's available in Xamarin? Is that normally available in a week or 6 months or 2 years?
On the GA side, on the general availability side,
Yeah.
it's that day.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fast.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
You can even get the preview ahead of time as well.
I did not realize it was that.
And there's preview releases where you can do it, where you can access the early access stuff. Same thing with Android.
Okay. I did not realize that. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right.
They're really good about it.
My other unrelated question to that is, so in your example there, you were saying if you need to write something, you'll end up writing it in C# and then you can link it to whatever. What if you need to write some, and this is maybe a C# question more so.
Sure.
But it's been a really long time since I've done C#.
Sure.
Actually. But if I need to write something in or pull a library that is not in C# in, what is the FFI story in C# Xamarin world?
The what story?
Like a foreign function interface.
Oh,
something.
like if I want to use like a Cocoa nib or an Android jar or something like that, or Cocoa
Or if I
Pod.
needed to use like a C library or something.
Yeah.
You just have to put it in the native project. It's not that bad.
Yeah, it's not really bad. You can just say import jar or import Cocoa Pod, and it just brings it in and it builds the whole interface for you. Yeah. Because you don't have the source code to that anyway, so if it crashes in that component, you'll know. But that's all it can do. Does that make sense? Meaning it'll build the bridge into it.
Okay.
Just like if you're on in Xcode and you brought in a CocoaPod or some external library in Xcode, if you don't have this, it'll be just like any other thing that you bring in. You won't be able to debug it because it's already compiled. But you can bring it in. The short answer is yes, you can bring all those libraries in. There's no restriction on that.
And a lot of times you have to, if you use a third party.
That I know of.
Like, it'll give you instructions on how to bring that stuff in.
Yeah. And it'll try to automatically bring everything in, but there's probably issues, you know. But I've done that in the past and it's worked. Yeah. Did I answer your question though?
For the most part. Yeah.
Okay. If you have more questions, follow up with me. I'll try helping you. Yeah, I've got some resources that'll help you here too at the end.
Are there any training websites that will train you in Xamarin?
Absolutely, and I will get to that at the end. Yeah, I have a whole list. You can write it down. I'll make the slides available too on the Meetup site. Yeah, and I'm recording this. At least I think I am. Let me look to see. Does it say that it's still recording? Oh, cool. Yeah, I never started it. Just kidding. Okay, I've done that before. And they're like, man, this is why I charge my phone at the end of the day, so I have no space. Yes, mobile devices. Any other questions? Okay. So, a little bit of history on Xamarin. There were the paid days. We don't want to talk about those. Those were very expensive. But that's when all you could do, the only thing Xamarin really offered you, which was still amazing, was you could build your native application in iOS, or for iOS and or Android in C#. That's all you do. Which, by the way, was cool. If you're already a .NET developer, the barrier to entry was minimal because now you're just learning an operating system and a framework. So per operating system, you're learning a framework. how iOS, all of its frameworks work. You learn that, plus you understand how iOS works. Android, same thing. You gotta learn about, when something is in the Android namespace, when something's in the Java namespace. But other than that, you have to learn what the Android, how the Android operating system works. That's all you need to know. Everything else was C#, so you could immediately get to code. That was great. But time went on. People wanted more than that. They're like, man, but I still had to build all this damn AXML. And if you've ever built an Android app and had to do XML layouts, it is not fun. And if you've built an iOS application, if you remember using the option, the control key, and the command key in order to just drag one thing to another to be what it was, a receiver, a receptor. I don't care. It was terrible. I don't care that they had the storyboard. It was horrifying. So how do you abstract the UI? I want to build the UI once. I want to build the code once. I want to build all my services once. I want all the logic once. Why can't I do the UI once? Well, enter Xamarin Forms. Xamarin Forms basically is a super light abstraction layer where you build the UI once and it maps all the elements to native views. So a label in Xamarin Forms is a UI label on iOS to a label on Android. It's I don't remember what it's called on iOS, but whatever the text entry is, and then it's a text edit field on Android. I don't remember all the exact names, but the cool thing is it's very light, like one hop to the native control. So there's no UI, or there's no performance degradation. You build the UI once, it compiles the UI, and then that's what gets run. It's very cool. And you build all that with XAML. Anybody remember Silverlight? Well, XAML actually I have found to be insanely powerful, especially when it comes to doing this. And then I go to the application. Does anybody want, as I go through some of this, to kind of point out what some of these things look like with code? Would that help? I'll bring that up. Because you don't need to stare at slides the whole time. So one of my latest applications that I'm working on, I'm in the Youth Mentoring Initiative, and they need an app. Yeah, they need an app to maintain the relationship between, or to manage the relationship between the mentee and the mentor. So you work with kids, like 10 years old to 18 years old, and you just meet with them once a week for like 35 to 60 minutes, and you're just a positive role model in their life. Say what you want about me, I'm okay, I guess. But as I went to all these different, because I've got a couple mentees, when I would go to the meetings, I would notice there's people who wouldn't remember the details are about their mentee. They might have multiple mentees. How do you take notes for all of that? How do you learn about how do you recall all the details about the mentee? Like they take a survey when they get into the program that talks about their likes and interests and challenges, etc. It's helpful to come back and look at that. How about contacting their parents? How do you surface all that information? So an app would be great for that. Let's put all that in one place. Resources that might help the mentees, and the mentors learn how to be a better mentor or a better student. How do you surface that information? So I'm like, well, I'd love to build that, and I'll build an iOS and Android app. And so, of course, knowing me, I'm writing it all in Xamarin. So, first I'm going to show you, I just changed the editor size here to 200%. Can you all read that?
Yes.
Okay, how many people have written an Android app before? All right, great. Anyone recognize anything interesting here for an Android app? It's a main activity. This is kicking off my Xamarin app on Android. It has a main activity. I set up my tab layout resource, my toolbar resource. I set my theme. If you've ever done this in Java, this looks very similar. This is kicking off my application on Android. I then have some other functions in there. I configure freaky fast image loading. I configure barcode scanning for this particular platform, Android. I configure Sync Fusion controls, which is like a third-party library of things. That's cross-platform also. That's the cool thing. All the extensions that all these third parties make are cross-platform. So the same thing that you have for iOS is available for Android. So if I have a barcode generator, I have an iOS and an Android version of it. I don't have to go find one implementation for one platform and another implementation for another platform. Maybe pay twice. Sounds terrible. And then, instead of continuing with the activity, like you normally would, like you'd inflate your layout. If you're an Android person, you probably recognize inflating a layout. And then that brings up your main UI for that activity, because an activity is basically you can look at like a single screen. I don't do that. I say, hey, load application, new app. That call right there is what's handing everything off over to Xamarin Forms. And that's where the UI gets taken over by Xamarin Forms. The iOS app. Let's go take a look at that guy. Anyone notice I'm in Visual Studio, right? So I get all the cool resharper features. I could say app delegate and just look for it. Oh, app delegate. There it is, appdelegate.cs. Sorry for all the messiness because it's 200%. Look at that, there's finished loading. How many people have done iOS apps? Okay, iOS app, right? On finished loading, right? Kind of the same thing, same structure I use. I set up the platform-specific stuff, and then I say, load application. Hands everything off to Xamarin Forms. Now all my UI is managed by Xamarin Forms. Now, what does that look like over here? Let's take a look. I will collapse this. Here, was it Windows Plus? There we go, cool. Everyone see that? So let's take a look here. Most of you were Android developers at some point, so I can at least show you that. When I expand this, you'll notice a few things. I have a models project, holds all my projects that I want, or my models that I want to be global to my application. So when I add my API, I'm gonna have a lot of my shared models right there. That's a good place to put them. A utility project that just has a bunch of functions that I want to be available across all my applications. They're not platform specific. It might be some URL formatting or validation code that I want, or some sort of something. It just needs to be shared. It's all C#. Then I have, and I'll get into the YMI mobile app. The YMI mobile app is my Xamarin Forms application. It's just a library. It has Xamarin Forms in it. And I call into that, and it basically takes over all the UI stuff. I don't have to do that. I never had to use Xamarin Forms. I could have just gone and had my iOS app and still use my models and my utility projects with no problem. The only thing is my UI would not be shared. Now, I won't get into depth on this, but I can go both ways though. I could have things that are best done by doing it in a storyboard, or like a UI table controller, etc. If you're in iOS, or various Android views that I do with AXML that are better laid out using the platform-specific stuff. I could do all of that and convert it and bring it up. Or I can use Xamarin Forms to build a whole bunch of the simpler screens and manage everything in an iOS and Android app, because every Xamarin Forms view, you can say as UI table controller or something, or as Android. Basically, you can say as Android view or as iOS view, and it'll automatically build the view that you need. So if you want to do the simpler stuff using Xamarin Forms, you could do that too. You can go the other way. It's very cool. But we could do that in a different meetup or a different meeting. So, but no matter what, I'm building an Android and iOS app. I have both of those in there. I cannot get around the fact that if I'm building an Android app, I must have an Android project. And if I'm building an iOS app, I must have an iOS project. Because Xamarin, at the end of the day, is building a native application for each platform. It's not taking your code and turning it into an iOS app. It's not a transpiler. It is building an Android app, it's building an iOS app, and then it's calling out to all the other stuff. So if I look at the Android app, it looks just like any Android app you've ever built, for the most part. It has a main activity, it has a resources folder, like res drawable, res values, res layout, all that stuff is there. You take a look. You know why that has to be there? Because that's how you build an Android app. You have to have an Android app. There's nothing different about it. It's an Android app.
So I could layout, so what's in the layout folder?
Not much of anything, because I pass it all to Xamarin Forms. So the cool thing is, and we'll get into that, I want to make it clear that there's no magic here where I just say, I want an Android app. And it goes, okay, cool, I'll just take care of all that for you. No, it builds an Android app. And then you have, if you want to use Xamarin Forms to handle the UI, you have to call out to Xamarin Forms to do it. So you got to build the Android app, and then Xamarin Forms is just one more thing that's running inside of your Android app. You're not building a Xamarin app, you're building an Android app that has Xamarin. Just like any maybe UI framework that you have in Android.
Is this your like typical project layout here, or is it Auri fancy?
No, it's not a fancy thing that I do.
Okay, just making sure.
No, this is actually very similar
That's
to,
what I was trying to.
this is basically what you get out of the box.
Yeah, it's all good.
This is your out-of-the-box experience. Other than like the utilities and the models, you would get 3 projects. If you went Xamarin Forms, if you just create like a Xamarin iOS app, just said, I want an iOS app. You're in Visual Studio, I want an iOS app. It's not using Xamarin Forms, you would just get this project. And that's it. So, but pay attention. If you're an iOS developer, check that out. It's an iOS app. That's what it is. If you ever built an iOS app before, this is what an iOS app looks like. You start a new one in Xcode, you'll get like app-delegate.swift and main.swift. But at the end of the day, the only difference is in C#. So you take a look at app-delegate. You'll see if you scroll all the way up. Oh, that's right, I gotta move over. Look at the things it's bringing in. So sure, you get cool things that are .NET-y, like Link. Woo, Link, right? But look at some of these others that you're getting. Foundation. UI kit. It's all there. Because this is an iOS app. It's not some abstraction over iOS. It's an iOS app. Then what it does, like I showed you, it calls into the application, the Xamarin Forms application. So if we take a look at that guy, I'm gonna make this a little, I can turn this off now. There we go. This is the Xamarin Forms side of it. So the Xamarin Forms application, if we take a look at it, and you can build this one pretty close to what you get out of the box. I've modified it a little bit, but not by much. Like I use a resources file for all my strings. So you get all the cool localization features of .NET. So you can have a string resources.enus, string resources.fr, string resources.whatever, and you can do your localization all built in. Ooh, cool stuff. My constants, things like that. But then, all my views, you can see they're all Xamarin. So these are all the ones that I call into, or that I use for my UI. And then I have little fragments that I use, like common ones. So like my header and my footer, all that stuff I bring in. So I reuse my components. I have global styles. So if I look at my app.xaml, you'll see I have some details. And I say, hey, on iOS, I want to use open sans semibold. And then on Android, I have to use open sans semibold, PTF regular. There's certain rules that you have to use when you're using custom fonts. So I can set different values based on which platform I'm on. I can set my colors, all my standard application colors. They actually have a CSS model now. I haven't gotten into it, but you can actually just build everything using CSS. It looks just like a style sheet. So if you're used to using CSS for all your styling, you can do that too. And it'll work. I'm so used to doing it this way though. Yeah. I'm setting default styles, like what should a label look like? What should, in a list view for a mentee, its title label should look like this. I'm doing it all in one place. So I kind of like having like a style CSS on a website, like your main styles document. That's what I use. I put it all in one nice place. And I'm not going to get too far into the code because we only have so much time. But the cool thing is I did build an iOS app, I did build an Android app, and then I just sent everything off to this, which handles everything else. If we look inside of this guy, he has an on start, an on sleep, an on resume, so he can handle that on a per platform basis. So I don't have to go and write that in two different places. Although I can act differently based on the platform. I can say, if I'm on iOS, I want you to do this. And if I'm on Android, I want you to do this. And if I want to do something special on Android, I can use the dependency service that's built in, or I can use, there's a bazillion of them you can use, just .NET, pick your poison. You can use Unity if you want. Give me the instance for this particular platform, and you'll get it. You can even see, right now, I have a fake current user service that I've registered. So when I finally build my API for this, I'll say, hey, there's a dependency on the real user service. The real user, what do I call it? Yeah, the real user service, real current user service that manages all the current user state. I'll just swap that, and then everywhere that I was using my interface for managing user state, I'll get the real one. Yay, built-in dependency service. This is not IOC though. It's not a container, it's service lookup. So, but which you could go and use something else if you want. For my purposes, this was fine. If you ever want to deep dive into that stuff, or you want to talk about some of these things, let me know. I'm happy to talk about it, or find someone to talk about it. So, Let me get back to the slides. So it used to be paid, and then the original Xamarin Forms stuff came out, and it was a little janky. It was cool, like what you just saw is Xamarin Forms 4.2, I think 4.1, 4.2. I've been around since the Xamarin Forms 1 days, and it's a big difference. But Xamarin Forms 1 was pretty freaking cool because I no longer had to build a storyboard. I didn't have to build an AXML file. I could do all my UI in once. And if I wanted to do anything custom, like that required something that Xamarin Forms didn't already support, I could do either what's called custom renderer, which Vic, I know you're familiar with, but these days, you don't even have to go that deep where you had to write a whole implementation. You can do an effect. Say, hey, if there's a version of this effect for the platform I'm on, use it, but if not, just use whatever the built-in functionality is. It'll let you get away with things. It's very cool. It's a lot faster. These days, Forms, pretty freaking amazing. It'll handle your navigation stack for you, forward, backward, push pop, messaging between all the different views, data binding, which is insanely powerful. So it's a very powerful data binding system. So you can say, bind it to this observable collection, and as that collection changes, boom, 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 everything changes in your collection. You brought new data in from the API, boop, you don't have to do anything, it updates. Now there's a little wire up you have to do there, because anything that's observable, you gotta wire it up. That's C#, and you should just know that. Otherwise you'll build something and be like, why doesn't it work? It's Xamarin's fault. No, you just don't know how observable works. Huh?
Microsoft made Windows Presentation Foundation, which I think was partly made for touchscreen, wasn't it? Was that somehow incorporated into Xamarin?
The Windows what?
The Windows Presentation
Oh,
Foundation.
WPF?
Is that part of this, or?
WPF isn't part of this, but the XAML side of things is very similar. So there used to be like the WPF / like UWP XAML, and then there was Xamarin's XAML. Now we have XAML standard, and that's the same across all of them. So yeah, originally there was some confusion, but it wasn't a lot of confusion. Like, most of the elements were the same. So if you knew XAML on one, you could figure out the other one. It wasn't really that different, just some things had different names. Now, these days, you don't even have to build all your navigation manually anymore. Like before you had to say push a modal async